Welcome to the Educational Physics Podcast. I am your host, João Figueiredo. This podcast is all about education, pedagogy, mindset, and really any other nonsense that I think about during the week. Enjoy. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing, reviewing, or even sharing with your friends. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Educational Physics Podcast. This is episode 18, and today I would like to talk about the role of philosophy in education. Should we be helping our students think about the big questions? Or should we be more focused on teaching them skills for, I guess, more practical life? Get a job, start a career, make money, etc., etc. So first I'm going to talk to you about my own personal experience with this. I would say that because I studied and I grew up in Portugal, I had a very different relationship with education than what people in the UK have. And that comes down to the way the system is organized and the curriculum and everything like that. For instance, one of the things that I found very interesting to learn about the UK and its educational system, not the system, but more so the curriculum and its focus and priorities, was that, for example, students in school, so before they are adults, they learn about taxes and they learn about savings and how to manage their money and stuff like that. In Portugal, and I'm not making a claim for this is better and that's worse. I'm just saying that in Portugal, that's completely unthinkable. We would simply not discuss those things with what we would consider, and this is a cultural thing, we would consider children. Now, I actually so happen to believe that, yes, it is good to teach children about money and money management, and explaining to them that it is something to be aware of, that it's not some sort of infinite resource and you have to make it, save it, invest it, grow it, etc., etc. So that's just one of the examples of these cultural differences affecting curriculum. So then it makes me think, our priorities, education-wise, are much more romantic, if you will, right? We focus way more on teaching broader skills for academic success. And it makes me also think about the issues that could come from only focusing on very, very practical skill sets, right? So like the tax, knowing about taxes example is just an example, but it really shows that, there's an importance that is given to that sort of knowledge that obviously takes up time and resources when it comes to teaching these things. So you can't really allocate time to teaching, for example, philosophy. So then the question is, which is a philosophical question, should we also invest time in our schools and include this in national curriculum and teach and nurture the ability for children to think about the big questions? Should this be a thing? And I'll make my case for it because I do believe that it should. Children grow up to be, or they are wired to be sponges, as we all know. But that conditioning that they are very accepting of comes at a cost, right? After a while, that ability to internalize information patterns and behaviors starts to calcify. I'm not saying that it gets to a point when it's unchangeable. This is not true. We are very malleable creatures and adaptive and everything. But it does start to calcify. The data is clear on that. There are certain stages of development where the absorption of information and then its application in the real world, it's just more efficient. Okay. Having said that, if we help our children think about broader questions such as, should we have a purpose? Should we attempt to give meaning to our lives? What does it mean to be different from other people? And this is a difficult one, because I appreciate that some level of ideology could come into this, right? The first few questions about purpose and meaning, religion would claim that it answers those questions. So I am coming into this from a perspective, a bit more of a secular perspective, I guess. Again, not dissing religion. It's got its place and value. And I do appreciate a lot of what it does for people, and also on the philosophical front. But without labeling these questions, right? I guess that's the key here. How can we go about helping our children think more deeply and ask questions and allow them to question each other amongst themselves? Think about what separates them, what unites them. And these are tough questions, and a lot of teachers would probably struggle with conducting these sessions. We would most likely need philosophy teachers. But regardless of the specifics of the logistics, what really makes me think is that a lot of adults grow up to struggle with thinking about ideas. And I appreciate there's also an element of personality. Some people are more inclined to pursue these questions. There seems to be some data on the fact that introverts are just more, they're just more molded to think more deeply and in more abstract ways, which makes sense because extroverts would want to just socialize and be in the crowd rather than observe the crowd. And if you want to think deeply about things, you kind of need to just distance yourself and ponder. I find I am pretty much an introvert. I recharge my batteries when I'm in either alone or in one-on-one situations. If it's a crowd, I happily do it, but it's not something that charges me. It's something that drains me, even if I enjoy it, right? This is something that we can talk about in a different podcast, introverts versus extroverts. And then, of course, all the overlaps in between. But the fact that we don't think about these deeper questions, what's the outcome? The outcome is that we grow up not really feeling connected to our humanity. And we grow up more attached to a job and a career than the thing that we already had inside when we were born and we didn't have a job, right? Because then it begs the question, do people only acquire human value once they start making money? So they have no value whilst they are children? Evidently, no one would say that this is correct. But it's implied that this is correct when, in fact, our value as people is associated to our jobs. Look, I love my job and I love my career, but I don't see myself as that thing that I do. That's just something that I do. Once upon a time, I didn't do that, and will come a day that I won't do it again. And even if I do that, still, the time that I spend with my family doesn't have less value than the time that I spend growing my business, right? The time that I spend with my family, I try to cherish that more. As fun as it is to grow a business that I'm passionate about, but it is fun. It's a game, right? It's not. It gives meaning. It acquires meaning. That game gains meaning once I feel connected to what gives me a sense of connection to other humans. That's where the value of that game comes from. The financial element of it is a vehicle for me to enhance those relationships with others. So if I have a bigger business, I have more relationships with others. And that's really what motivates me, right? I want to help more people. I want to get to more people. I want to support more students. And that for me is the end all and be all. So these big questions, should we be teaching them? Should we be nurturing that and instilling that spirit, that inquisitive spirit into children? And if so, from what age, right? Like I have, as many of you know, a 5-year-old child. And we have deep conversations. And look, I understand that he's 5 and they don't last long because his attention span is still developing. But we have fun having them, and they are becoming more dense as he grows up and grows older. And I can see that he is connecting more and more dots. I can see how the conversations that we have prior manifest themselves in application weeks later, months later. So you start to see that intellectually those seeds are starting to grow and blossom, and that's all one can hope for when challenging someone's intellect, is that you're planting seeds and allowing them to do their own thing. I truly believe that education as a whole and humanity as a whole would gain hugely by going back to a more old school approach to education, which would be to teach people how to think rather than what. And that ties back into what we were talking about last week, right? To not allow agendas to come into this. And it would be much more difficult to allow agendas to come into education if children from a very young age, say, I don't know, 3 years old, were taught to ask questions and how to formulate those questions and how to improve on them, which is something that I personally, as a father, spend quite a lot of time helping my kid doing, right? He asks me a question, and sometimes I honestly don't really understand exactly what he's trying to know. But sometimes I do understand, but I know that I'm having to translate it, and I'm able to translate it because I know him. But if it requires that much effort for me to decode the question, someone else won't spend as much energy decoding the question. And so I help him rephrase, reformulate. You have to be more specific. You have to be more clear. You have to give more context. And I explained to him what all those things mean. What is context? Right? And then you can use age-appropriate language to explain this. For example, children understand storytelling very well for multiple reasons, right? First of all, because if you're a somewhat decent parent, you're going to read stories to them. They watch TV, so they watch movies and shows and this and that. All of that has a plot. So they understand storytelling. So then if you want to explain context, you explain, or lack of context, right? You explain or you exemplify it by saying, imagine that you're reading a book, but you start reading the book, 2 pages, or 20 pages into the book, right? Then there's going to be a lot that's going to be missing, right? You wouldn't know who the characters are, where they came from, why are they on this mountain, what's going on here. That's not having context. So when you ask questions, you need to start on page 1. And he understands that, right? Schools could be playing a role in this, right? Especially on the formulation of questions. It is crucial that students of all ages feel comfortable and confident in asking questions. And I feel, and we've all experienced this, if you're an educator or if you're just a student, you've experienced this, right? The teacher asks any questions, right? Does anyone have any questions? And no one asks anything. Does that mean that no one has anything to ask? No. It means that no one in that situation had the confidence in themselves to ask a question because they often feel they can't formulate a question appropriately. Now, I've seen this, at university level. So when you're dealing with 20-year-olds who don't feel confident about their verbal skills, that says a lot about the educational system, doesn't it? Why are these students so self-conscious about asking questions and thinking out loud? Allowing themselves to just verbalize their thoughts, allow themselves to hear them. That's something that I do a lot because, honestly, I don't have the self-consciousness when it comes to my own ignorance. I am ignorant about lots of things, and that doesn't bother me at all. And I appreciate that when people are younger, they have a bit more ego, and which is obviously a consequence of insecurity. I'm older, so I'm a bit more comfortable with the fact that I don't know lots of things, but I also know lots of things. So I can sort of connect dots, and more often than not, speaking out loud and asking questions to those who have had those internal conversations before, it's very, very helpful. So this is my case for philosophy in early education. Teaching students how to think, how to ask questions, how to formulate them, how to verbalize their thoughts and expand on them. Challenge them to go deeper, right? Asking questions like, what do you mean by that? To force students to go beyond the surface. This is my case for the introduction of philosophical thinking, if not philosophy as a subject. It doesn't have to be that, but philosophical thinking, meta thinking, teaching students about metacognition, allowing them to think for themselves instead of just regurgitating textbook. Asking students what do you think this piece of information means and how does this apply in real life? And trust me, all sorts of subjects allow for this, including history, right? You're talking about the past. But then let's ask the questions, right? How does this translate? Or how does this explain even events of the present, and how does this help us predict events from the future? That is more abstract thinker. And great historians have that skill. But most people, they don't really understand the purpose of history or economics or maths or right, you name it. Because we're not taught in school how to create a meta thread that joins all these different subjects. And that for me is because of the lack of inquisitive thinking. So I'll leave you with this. This episode will be slightly shorter than usual because I just wanted to make my case for more philosophical thinking in schools. Moving forward, I'm going to discuss this more deeply, talk about the benefits, the potential disadvantages, if I can find any, but I'll try. Because one of the things that is very important in philosophical thinking is that you're willing to play devil's advocate with yourself and your ideas, which is also tied to scientific thinking, right? The role of religion and how to incorporate that into education without creating ideology. By the way, the key will be in the inquisitive aspect of all of this. So with that, I'll ask you, is there anything about your experience in education that you regret not having experienced? If so, let me know, comment, message me. I'll debate these things next time. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, comment, the whole shebang. You get it. Take care. Bye-bye.